Good morning. It's March 22nd, 2020, and we're all trying to come to terms with the outbreak of the coronavirus. A lot of people have been overwhelmed by the news and seem to be really struggling with trying to get a handle on, is this some kind of big hoax? Is this for real? And it seems to me that the biggest thing that's troubling people is trying to make sense of the numbers. And so I wanted to take a moment today to share with just an illustration and some thoughts with you to try and help you make sense of the numbers. Last Sunday, we shot a video and sent it out that explained a bit of the science behind what's going on to hopefully make more sense of that. And we can sum that up very simply. Two numbers tell you the story of this current outbreak. One of them is the R0 factor, which tells us that the spread of this disease is much more rapid than the spread of the common flu. It has an R0 factor of like 1.2 or 1.3. This disease is like a 2 or a 3, up to a 3.8. So it's spreading much faster than the flu, and it has a mortality rate much worse than the flu. Flu has a mortality rate of about 1 in 1,500 people who die. This disease has a mortality rate that's probably going to land at least around 2 or 3%. So when those two numbers are high, mortality rate and R0 factor, you have a perfect storm for a terrible outbreak like what we are currently facing. But the thing that continues to confuse people is the raw numbers of this disease. In the United States, as of today, starting the day, we have a little under 30,000 people who have been identified as definitely having the disease. And so people look at that number, they look at the number of deaths, which is less than 500 for America. We look at the numbers globally and we think, is this really that big of a deal, especially knowing that the flu this last year affected more than 26 million Americans. So could this disease really be that big of a problem? I want to share something with you to put all that in perspective. Imagine with me that you had a big pond in your backyard and you decided that you wanted to add lily pads to your pond, and so you ordered a special kind of fast reproducing lily pad. You got 2 of them and you put them in the edge of your pond, and you came back the next day to see if they had multiplied, and sure enough, this is a fast reproducing thing, and so it doubles every day. And so on the first day that you check, 2 have become 4. The next day, 4 have become 8. On day 3, that's become 16. Now, what you don't realize is that your entire pond is so big that it can actually hold up to 330 million lily pads. The reason that we use that number is because there are 330 million people in America today, and each of these lily pads represents a person who is diagnosed with COVID-19. Now, the math question becomes, how many days would it take for your pond to completely fill with lily pads after you put 2 in there and they're doubling once every 24 hours? I'll go ahead and cut to the chase for you. 28 days is the answer to the question. In 28 days, 2 would have multiplied to more than 330 million. But here's what's really interesting to move beyond that number is to realize if you had looked on day 27, now remember on day 28, there's total saturation. On day 27, half of your pond is unaffected. On day 26, 3/4 is unaffected. On day 25, 7/8 of your pond is unaffected. Now here's what's really crazy when you really start working backwards in that. Remember, day 28, total saturation. On day 21, you don't have any earthly idea that your lily pads are getting out of control, because on day 21, less than 1% of your pond has lily pads in it. This is the conundrum that we face now. It doesn't look like we have that big of a problem because human minds don't think logarithmically. We think in terms of addition, subtraction, or simple multiplication, but we don't think in exponential factors. And an outbreak like this is an exponential outbreak. So here's the thing that you need to know about where we stand today on March the 22nd. In our little example, going from 2 as a beginning point to 330 million being total saturation of the United States, if that takes 28 multiplications of 2, where are we today? And the answer is quite significant. Today, by early afternoon, we'll cross the 30,000 threshold of confirmed cases of COVID-19. And that point in time is when we have crossed day 14 in our example. We are exactly 1/2 way from the beginning point of the first 2 cases to total saturation, and that has taken us 2 months. It took us 2 months to multiply 14 times, and that gives us a good idea of how long it's going to take to get to total saturation. Now, thankfully, COVID-19 isn't multiplying where it doubles at a rate of once every 24 hours. So the question then becomes, how fast is it multiplying? If you go back and you track the numbers for the past few weeks, the number of diagnosed confirmed cases is doubling more than once every 3 days. If you use that math to multiply it on out, I can tell you that 30 days from today, we'd have more than 30 million cases of COVID-19 in the United States, and 10 days later, we'd have total saturation. 40 days from today would be total saturation. And people say, wait a minute, the math isn't good there, because there are so many people who have the disease who haven't been diagnosed, and there are so many new tests that are being introduced, it throws the math off. And to some extent, that's correct. And so scientists and doctors point out it's the mortality rate, it's the number of deaths that gives us a much clearer picture of how rapidly this disease is advancing. So what does that tell us? If we backtrack over the past 3 weeks, the number of deaths in the United States is doubling not once every 3 days, but once every 4 days. Remember now, we are halfway through this 28-day progression. Each day in our little illustration represents now 4 days. It's 4 days to double, and we're 14 doublings from total saturation. Quick math on that. That's 56 days. 8 weeks from today, if we continue exactly as we are, if we do exactly what we've done the last 2 months, 8 weeks from today, all Americans would be infected with this disease, essentially. The crazy thing to consider is halfway between where we are now and that point, 4 weeks from today, less than 1% of Americans would have this disease. That's the power of exponential math. Today, less than 1/100th of 1% have the disease. In 4 weeks, if we don't change anything, we continue to track along with the same math, almost 1% would have the disease, and 4 weeks later, we would have total saturation. And oh, by the way, if you do the doubling math 14 more times out, the number of deaths in the United States would be 5.8 million people at that point. That would be a mortality rate of about 1.7%, which is fairly optimistic. Now, that's a lot of numbers, and quite honestly, it's very discouraging numbers. We're not sharing this information to try and freak anyone out or to say, oh, it's gloom and doom and the end of the world. It's not. I'm simply pointing these things out to you because there are a couple of things that we can do to make a real difference. And the first thing is the obvious thing. Do what the authorities are telling us to do. Stay home. We can slow this disease and in some cases stop it in its tracks if we'll just do what we've been told to do. Stop going out and acting like everything's okay. If you'll cut off direct contact with everyone outside of your household for the next several weeks, and if we all do this, the disease has no place to go. It will quickly die out in many places, but we all have to participate in doing this. And there's one other key thing that you and I can do, and that is to pray, to call on God who has the power to stop this thing in its tracks. When we pray, the heart and the hand of God are moved. Let's together do our part, work like it's all up to us, and pray like it's all up to God. You stay safe, stay in touch, and please stay home, and remember that you are loved.